Welcome to a special edition of Economics Applied. I'm here with Austan Goolsbee, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and a member of the FOMC, which sets U.S. monetary policy. Austan, it's great to see you and thanks for joining, but you could be out there hiking the mountains, watching bison, searching for bears. You have been. Okay, good. I mean, I was worried about you.
I drove here, and I probably came the longest distance of anybody. We're driving my son out. He's going to start working in Washington.
Okay, great.
So we toured a couple of national parks, and I got my 50th state, North Dakota.
All right. Well, good for you. Okay, so I'm glad you're not all work and no play in your job. So
Steve, you're just making peace. Steve and I we're colleagues for 25 plus years. So I got a lot of dirt on him, but he's got even more on me. Yeah. So we're not.
I forgot to say that. You're not just the Chicago Fed president, FOMC member, but most importantly, former colleagues of Chicago Booth. And we're gonna touch on Chicago Booth again because I wanted to ask you about and talk to you about a paper you wrote with our friend and Chicago Booth colleague, Chad Syverson, and it has the arresting title, I'll get it right here, The Strange and Awful Path of Productivity in the U.S. Construction Sector. Starts out like a science fiction short story.
Yeah, and it ends in a horror film.
Okay, so tell me, what's so strange and awful about construction productivity in the U.S.?
What's strange and awful about productivity in construction, if you're used to thinking about manufacturing or you're used to thinking about technology, is it doesn't get any better. At the most, it's completely flat for 40 years. And by most measures, it's negative. Literally 40 years, productivity growth in construction going down.
So booming productivity growth in manufacturing, for example, for decades.
So
compared to agriculture.
Absolutely. But compared to the rest of the economy, it's both strange and awful. And so that's why we said that.
Is it also strange compared to other countries?
It's harder for us to say that. In this paper, we tried a lot of the discussion among analysts has been, well, maybe it's just a measurement problem. Maybe if we measure the price deflators better in construction, this anomaly would go away. And we tried to narrow it down to just single family homes, just different types of construction. You have these definitional problems elsewhere in the world, but my impression from McKinsey reports and things like that are that construction productivity has lagged throughout the world, that it's not just the U.S.
Okay, but correct me if I'm wrong, there is work by Jim Paterba, among others, that the U.S. construction sector more broadly, at least for infrastructure construction, is extraordinarily expensive in the U.S. to build things compared to other rich countries.
Big 1 mile of subway, you want to do, pave 1 mile of road. Infrastructure projects are astoundingly expensive in the U.S.
So to the extent that
it might contribute to that.
Yes.
It might be productivity, the lagging productivity growth in the sector may be contributing to that. That's less. As we got farther and farther into it, try to look just at single family home building. It wouldn't really explain.
And I presume when you drill down to single family homes, you're controlling for square footage. You're trying to control for the other quality attributes of the house.
We would try to do.
And so even when you do all that,
it's still flat. At best, like I say, the best you could say for it is it's basically flat.
Okay.
It's probably negative over a pretty long period.
Okay, that's pretty depressing. And so, that begs the question of why. But before I ask you the why question, just maybe tell us why this is important. Why is this important? Why do we care about this?
A couple of reasons. The first is construction's not an insignificant fraction of the economy. It's a decent-sized industry, and it tends to be pretty cyclical, and it tends to be pretty interest rate sensitive. So now in my new world of central banking, that's one of the tips of the spear of the business cycle. And if you're getting productivity growth going down in that sector, it's going to drag down productivity overall.
Right.
It's going to drag down growth, and you got to at least be thinking about those. And then the second is there's all of this effort, as you know, about thinking through the cost of housing.
Right.
And I'll just summarize it by over the last 20 years, it's not this thing that it feels like housing is very expensive. That's not a brand new phenomenon. If you compare CPI inflation of goods that you buy at Target to CPI inflation of housing, that's been relative price going up for housing of 4 to 5% a year, compounding for 20 years.
Okay.
So young people today saying, well, my dad we had only one salary. He didn't go to college and he was able to afford a big house. And now I can't even buy a condo. They're
Right.
not wrong, kind of compared to Costco. The amount of effort that the economics profession and especially the researchers have dedicated to that, and as compared to, well, what if there's a productivity side explanation?
Or to monetary policy.
Or the monetary policy.
Yeah.
I would just encourage everybody to.
Okay, so this is an understudied.
I think it's relatively
I think
understudied.
that's right. I think that's right. But let me just to summarize. You said two things, and then I want to ask you a related question. So one reason this is a concern for the broader society is it's just a drag on the overall level of productivity growth in the United States, and that means slower growth on the standard of living and so on. Okay.
Yes.
Now, the second thing is it the case that if you look at people in the bottom half or the bottom third of the income or the earnings distribution, that they tend to spend more on housing? So it's kind of there's a distributional element of it as well, or is that not the case?
Maybe. I'm not sure. You probably know more than I do. It gets into this distinctions about renters for sure.
Well, yes.
Renting is much more,
I guess,
common, but then you're getting into multifamily construction and stuff like that.
Maybe a better way to pose the question as well. There's a generational aspect. You already
for sure
alluded to it earlier.
Generational.
Young people.
There are people arguing that if you are concerned about the fertility crisis in advanced countries, that a major determinant of the slowing fertility is people would like to buy a bigger house and have some more space, and if housing's too expensive, they don't have kids.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I can sympathize with that from personal experience at points in my life. So, okay. So we got a problem.
Yeah.
It's a non-trivial problem. You've made that case. So now let's get to the question of why. Why is it so strange and awful?
We don't know. We kind of, there's an old line in the Simpsons. They paint a portrait of Montgomery Burns, and he says, Marge Simpson paints it. He says, Marge, I know what I hate, and I don't hate this. And this, I don't know what it is, but I know what it's not. Or at least the things that we thought of that are not correlated with it. So the first thing we thought was land use regulation is very much correlated. There's a lot of literature is very much correlated with inelastic supply of housing and is associated with higher housing costs. In the cross section, we have state level data, and at one point we even got into micro level data in the census of construction. It doesn't look like there's that much cross-sectional difference in the awful pace of productivity. So if you look at places that have land use regulations or don't have land use regulations, the productivity growth isn't that different.
Here, I think you're making an important distinction between these restrictions may make land very expensive.
Yes.
They don't necessarily make it expensive to construct a house on the land when you have it.
And
is that it?
Even if it made it expensive, the level, these are kind of productivity growth rates. So I do think, I thought of it mostly being a technology, must be some technology story. Ed Glazer and Joe Jerko, I believe, have a paper where they took our fact, and their argument is, and it might be plausible, we just have no way to test this, that essentially what happened is construction could have gotten on a path to becoming a manufactured good, where you have technological improvement.
Right.
and that what happened is the land use regulations might not affect it in the cross section by that much.
Yeah, no, that's
but
a good point.
They suppress the scale.
They suppress scale
was
that
scale,
and that suppression of scale that influences the incentives to innovate in manufacturing.
So that's kind of their argument, and that could be a plausible argument. I now in my new job, I went out. I spoke to the Iowa Farm Bureau. I was in the Chicago Fed District. We're in rural Iowa. I'm talking to the Farm Bureau. I said, "What's the biggest problem facing the Farm Bureau?" They said, "We can't. Our unemployment rate is in the 2s. We can't get workers." And I said, "Why can't you get any workers?" And they said, "Because the cost of housing is so outrageous, nobody will move here." And the thing is, I do believe that land use regulation is one of the factors driving this, but that can't explain why there's a housing affordability crisis in rural Iowa. I think there's other things going on.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I had a conversation with Tom Barkin, your Fed colleague, earlier today on this podcast, and we talked about small town growth, and he did observe that a lot of small towns want to revitalize in one way or another. Some of them are open to housing growth, some aren't. So I guess there is, even though this might not be the explanation for the country as a whole, if you make it more difficult to build new housing,
it's going to affect prices.
It's going to affect
I
prices.
believe that to my University of Chicago soul. And so that's why I don't mean to make light or to disparage the land use regulation and other regulation as an impact on the elasticity of housing supply.
Right.
That's a little different than the productivity growth rate structure.
There is a potential connection here. It's a little subtle. Let me draw it out. If it's the case, and I'm guessing it probably is, that it's cheaper to construct new homes and more productive in terms of labor hours required per square foot than it is in an already built urban center. If you somehow inhibit that process, which some parts of the country do through NIMBY, you are foregoing some what could be essentially productivity gains in the short term by not doing. Now that's not contrary to your facts. It's just saying
I agree with
there's an opportunity
and look,
we're not taking advantage of.
Kind of the Syverson's own work a lot of times looks at I guess it's sort of the productivity version of the old Davis flows on labor. And he'll say, of the new entrants, are they higher productivity than the others? Are we over time in a dynamic sense moving to more productivity?
Exactly.
Single family home construction, we're not. If anything, it's going the wrong way. Like we're moving to places, building more houses in places where the productivity is lower. So it's weird. I mean, there are parts of it that are weird. We didn't come to that paper. We tried a whole bunch of stuff. We were like, maybe it's mismeasured inputs. Maybe there's illegal immigration, high concentration of undocumented workers, and somehow that's driving things. We couldn't find evidence of that. We couldn't find differences in productivity growth of unionized versus not unionized states.
That's interesting
stuff
too.
like that. So I think it's an important area. It's open to anybody who wants to study that.
So
I encourage them to study.
For budding, aspiring PhD economists listening to this, you need a PhD. It's on Here's a good one.
This is a good one. This matters for the world.
Exactly.
And you can.
Why is it so strange? Is it this strange in other countries? Yeah. What can we do to improve it?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. What else you want to tell us on this topic? Or have I exhausted your insights?
Think through. There is one, if you're the kind of person who likes estimating production functions, there is a breakdown of let's call it, you could think of labor productivity as output per hour of a worker. Something about the conversion of inputs to outputs. If you created input productivity, that's the thing that really deteriorates over time. And that's even weird to think about. What is that? Why would it be that converting energy or construction materials have deteriorated? Now, you could make an argument I don't know that it is, but you could say, well, there have been a bunch of regulations national regulations about building materials, about stuff like that. Maybe that's
in play. Well, that prompted another thought. Is it the case that the residential housing construction that takes place in the United States today is much more infill, one off at a time, or a few housing units versus
absolutely
the Levittown model?
Yes, that is the argument that Glazer makes, that essentially there was a scale that you could build a whole bunch of identical houses, and that was really efficient, and it was more like a manufactured good.
Okay.
I think it is the case.
In that way,
for sure it's the case in dense places where, as you say, building out is fundamentally a different technology than building up.
Right.
And so I do think that can explain some of the cost.
That suggests there is a potentially important connection to land use regulation. If land use regulations make it harder to build at scale, even when it's economically feasible, then you're foregoing the advantages of the Levittown model.
I'm not disputing that is possible. I do grapple with the differences in level cost versus differences in growth rates.
No, I take that point. So but I agree with you. It's a subtle point, but you and I understand it's hard for people who don't think about this stuff all the time.
Yeah, they're like,
there's kind of one-time level effects versus growth rate effects, but even if we accept, this is my general view about a lot of total factor productivity growth issues, we don't really understand terribly well what drives productivity or about why it changes.
As in the words of the great economist Robert Solow, in the end, when we ask what are the sources of growth, we always go down in a blaze of amateur sociology. Yeah, there is something to that.
We do, I think, as economists, have something to say about how you might get incremental level.
We'll personally go look at it.
Yeah, and so that's how I think the Levittown is.
Right.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else you want to add, Austan?
On construction.
Or any other topic, what the Fed's going to do next.
Exactly.
We're straightening it up.
Happening interest rates.
No, I don't want to lose your job.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
great to see you.
Great to see you. Take care.